Okay, thank you, Shannon Falconer, for coming on to Future of Food podcast. It's very nice to meet you. You are the CEO of BioCraft, located in Vienna, which is a pet food company. You've also got a PhD in human microbiomes. Is that right? And you've worked on your doctorate. So the first question I want to ask you is, do you think dogs and cats can live healthily on a meat-free diet?
Well, so to answer your question, and by the way, hello, Alex. Thank you for having me on your show. I'm very happy to be here. So the short answer to your question is yes, I do think they can. I think there's some major caveats when we talk about cats, though. So for dogs, dogs are metabolically, they're omnivores. So they're much more similar to humans, actually, than they are to cats in terms of nutritional requirements. The biggest challenge with dogs, though, is that dogs do love meat, and arguably even more than humans. And B, that most pet parents want to feed their dogs meat. So although definitely the plant-based area of dog food is certainly growing, and that's great, and dogs can live long, healthy lives on plant-based diets. I think from the consumer perspective, it's going to be possibly never that we see all pet parents agree that they are comfortable feeding their dogs a plant-based diet. Hence why we at BioCraft are also focusing on making cultured meat for dogs as well. In terms of plant-based diets for cats, from a nutritional perspective, when we think about any kind of animal, regardless of whether or not it's a human or a cat, of course, all animals need specific nutrients to grow, not specific ingredients, right? So as long as we could get the nutrients from meat that cats require without the meat itself, then cats can live a healthy life on a plant-based diet. But the question is, can we get all the nutrients that cats need from plants? The answer to that is no. So what companies making vegan cat foods, because there are a very, very, very small few. What those companies have done is they use synthetically sourced versions of the nutrients that would otherwise come from meat. So those nutrients that make a cat a carnivore, for example, taurine, vitamin A, arachidonic acid, plants don't produce those nutrients. Only animal cells produce those nutrients in any meaningful quantities. And so if you're not going to provide those nutrients by way of meat as an ingredient, then you have to provide them through synthetic supplementation. So that's an option when it comes to vegan cat food. And in fact, I think a recent study out by Andrew Knight has showed that cats can live a healthy life on a plant-based diet. The challenge, though, again, there's the consumer acceptance piece, but the other very, very, very big significant piece is the palatability. So will cats eat a plant-based diet? And many of them won't. So it's all well and good if nutritionally that food is complete and cats could live a full enriched life on it. But if they don't eat the food, then you're kind of screwed, right? So and the main driver of palatability, what makes a cat want to eat something, largely it's that animal fat. It's not animal protein. It's not another nutrient. It's largely animal fat. And what we can't get from plants or even synthetically sourced is animal fat. Animal fat comes from animals. So this is a problem when we're talking about vegan cat food. Will cats eat it? Okay. Some will, some won't. Yeah.
Okay. So the product that you're creating at BioCraft there, what's it based on? Is it what meat is it cultivating?
So we are focused on making, we started with mouse being the ancestral diet of the cat. So in the wild, cats eat mice, they eat small birds, and they eat insects. Although chicken and beef, seafood, although those are the main ingredients in current commercial pet food, they're also the main allergens for our cats and dogs. So in making cultured meat, in growing sort of a source of meat that is most appropriate for our cats and dogs, we really saw this as an opportunity, to grow mouse, which from a nutritional perspective, ancestral perspective, is most appropriate. So mouse will be that will be our sort of the first ingredient that we launch. We also have derived cell lines from chicken as well, although chicken is an allergen for, it is the main allergen in food for cats and dogs. Nevertheless, chicken is still the main ingredient in commercial pet food. Many cats and dogs are not allergic to chicken, so we have this alternative as well. It's a little bit, in terms of development, we're not quite as advanced with the chicken cell line as we are with the mouse, but those are the two that we have at the moment.
Okay, that's interesting. So there are many dogs and cats out there kind of eating food that they might be allergic to, and their owners might not even know that they're allergic to it.
They may not. So typically an allergen would exhibit, so the symptoms would be some kind of, a lot of the time it's some kind of dermatological flare up. So whether or not it's really itchy skin or red, flaking, losing some of their fur. Some dogs or cats have more intestinal disturbances. But in any case, usually the first thing a vet will do if somebody brings their cat or dog to the vet with either of these symptoms presenting, and the vet suspects that it is an allergen, the first thing they will do is they'll change the food and the protein source of the food. And sometimes that is to what's referred to as a hydrolyzed protein diet, which basically just means that the protein found that would come from the animal, that's treated in a way before it's added into the food such that that protein is broken down into very, 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 very small units, such that the body does no longer recognize it as an allergen. Of course, the other way to deal with this problem is just to feed the pet a full protein source that's not hydrolyzed, but that their body doesn't actually see as an allergen.
Okay, all right. So it's fascinating that you're using mouse as your cell line. I wonder whether there are any other pet food providers out there that supply mouse to cats and dogs.
Not really, not in any meaningful way. So the majority of pet food, commercial pet food, it relies on basically using ingredients that come from the 50% of the animal that humans don't want to eat, or what is referred to specifically in the US, less so in Europe, but the dead stock. So those animals that don't ever make it to slaughter because they die in transit or due to dehydration, suffocation, disease. And so if an animal is not slaughtered for human consumption, it is then sold into, it's then sort of shunted toward the category of pet food. So mouse is just not something that people eat. So there's no supply chain for mouse in the human food category. Therefore, there's no supply chain for mouse in the pet food category as well. And this is really the sole reason why pet food largely consists of chicken and beef and pork and seafood, is because those are the main animals that humans eat, not because they're necessarily most appropriate at all for our cats and dogs.
So are you slightly concerned that it's a bit of a gamble and you might create it and cats and dogs might not like it anymore?
No, not at all. So, I mean, if we think about, again, from an ancestral perspective, this is what cats evolved eating. And in fact, for, cats that are feral cats living in the wild or living in feral colonies, unless they're attended by a feral colony keeper who's feeding them a commercial pet cat food, this is still what cats and dogs eat. And so, and in any case as well, we know that just with our product and sort of blending it with other ingredients that are already used in pet food, not animal-based ingredients, but other plant-based products, blending our product with our ingredient with those other ingredients, we know that acceptance is not an issue. So that's not the part that we're worried about.
Okay, so which is the part you're worried about?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think right now, as a startup, as a young startup, and we're always very, very mindful of, where we're a pre-revenue company. And as long as any company is a pre-revenue company, you always are relying on funding to sort of make sure you get to the next milestone. So that's, I'd say, definitely those are the pieces that make me most concerned. And if, and I know you have been, and probably your followers too, have been listening to the news, and there's been a lot of stir recently about cultured meat and that it's never going to be financially viable. And I think from our side, because we're producing something that's a little bit different from, well, not a little bit, quite a lot different from what the human food manufacturers are making, we are already very, very competitive with current costs that would be competitive with meat for pet food. Nevertheless, we are still lumped into the sort of the cultured category. So I think people immediately may assume that we're not in the running, or rather we are too similar to the human food companies. But just to explain that a little bit more, because we are creating something called a cultured meat slurry. So for us, we're focused on not creating a steak that looks like a steak and sits on the grill and sizzles like a steak. We are really only focused on the nutritional components of our food, right? Because as I said, all animals need nutrients, not ingredients. So the nutritional piece is key. So for us, really the priority is, when we take our animal cells and we grow them in this nutrient-rich broth that is largely, it's a plant-based, it's not an animal-based media. But then those animal cells that we've derived, right, our cell lines, they then take those plant-based inputs or nutrients, and then they convert them to basically those animal nutrients that are that are required by cats and dogs. So as I say, so for example, if we give our cells something like a precursor, so carotene, so our bodies, our animal bodies can eat a carrot and take something called beta carotene, and our bodies have the enzymatic ability to then convert that beta carotene into vitamin A, which our bodies then need. The reason why a cat is a carnivore is because it doesn't have, in its cellular composition, doesn't allow it to take something like carotene and convert it into vitamin A. So the cat actually requires a dietary source of complete vitamin A. And so we're using cells that have the ability, animal cells, to convert those precursor plant-based nutrients into those nutrients that cats require. So when we harvest our product from the bioreactor, we are not just harvesting the biomass, not just the cells themselves, which is what the human food category is doing, right? They're only focusing on the cells themselves, the cultured meat. We are harvesting everything from our bioreactor, which is both the cells, but importantly, all of the nutrients that those cells have made and spit out into the surrounding environment. So we take it all out of the bioreactor. So it's quite a liquidy sort of material, but nevertheless, it is nutritionally robust, which is what we require. And in the pet food category, actually, a type of ingredient that pet food manufacturers already use regularly is something called a meat slurry. And so we ultimately that's the ingredient profile that we are basically trying to mimic, or we are mimicking, so that pet food manufacturers can then replace their conventional meat slurries with our cultured meat slurry, and produce a product that's pretty similar to what they're producing today, but of course using a sort of a meat source that's made without the animal.
Right. So, but clearly the animal wouldn't be, the dog or the cat wouldn't be eating a slurry. They would be eating it in a sort of dried form, would they? Is that the idea?
Yeah. Exactly. So they would be, something like, a kibble or a wet food pate. So typically right now, the pet food industry, it's most people, when they feed their cats or dogs, either a kibble or a wet food pate, it's not just 100% meat. And so it is a combination of meat as well as various plant-based ingredients. And so for us, this would be an ingredient in what will be a final product. So our ingredient would replace the percentage of the ingredient of the cultured meat slurry, or sorry, the conventional meat slurry, but it's not 100% cultured meat. Nope.
Okay. All right. Fascinating. Do you think you're going to have any problems getting regulatory approval to produce and put on the market your product?
I mean, problems. So will it be sort of will there be a, I don't know if we can say an arduous road or a long road, but there will be a process, that's for sure. Whether or not it's going to be a problem, I don't know it's going to be a problem. It's just going to be a process.
I wonder whether to have pet food approved is different from having human food approved. I mean, clearly it would be a different process.
It is a different process. So in the US, the FDA, it's the Center for Veterinary Medicine under the FDA umbrella. These are the regulatory folks who are monitoring cultured meat or granting regulatory approval for cultured meat for pet food in the US. And so it's true, yeah, in the EU and in the UK, it will be different. When I mean different from the same bodies who would otherwise regulate cultured meat for human consumption. So we are in communication with the Center for Veterinary Medicine. We have a clear path to market. We know what we need to do in order to what information they need before they would consider granting approval. So I don't think that this is something that's going to be difficult. I think it's something, as I say, it's a process. It's going to take some time. We know, though, that in the US, regulatory approval has been given to 2 companies for consumption for their chicken for humans to consume. So we know that at least this leads one to believe that, inherently there's no a priori reason to believe that, it's going to be an absolute no-go for pet food either. It won't be. It will just be a process.
And are you going to apply in the US first? Is that your plan?
I wouldn't say necessarily first. I think, we're working with a partner, or we're speaking with the various bodies. So we're interested, ultimately, we want to disseminate our product, our ingredient, as widely as possible. So we are definitely looking to eventually gain regulatory approval in the EU and the UK, US, Asia, ultimately as far and wide as possible. And so, yeah, we're trying to navigate those various jurisdictions.
Okay. And is there much competition in the area of kind of cultivated alternative protein pet foods?
Well, there are quite a few companies that are now making plant-based food for dogs, and a few doing so for cats. But aside from the plant-based, we do know that there's one company making a product using precision fermentation, right? So this would be just the protein, animal protein for dog food. So Bond Pet Foods in the US. And a couple of other companies have mentioned an interest in making cultured meat for dog food. I think those are earlier companies. It's tough to say what type of IP or cell lines, or where they're at with costs and elimination of animal ingredients from their media, et cetera, et cetera. But so. And in addition to that, I'd say, in terms of competition, until any company, including in the human space, until any company is commercial, it's tough to say. I mean, is any other startup really a competitor? I think the metrics are only really meaningful once a company has commercialized and is actually showing traction with customers.
Yes. Have you heard of the company called Good Pet Food?
Good dog food, I think.
Dog food. Okay.
Yes.
Good dog food.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. That's in the UK. Yes.
Right. Okay. I mean, I'm not up to how advanced they are. Do you know anything about how advanced they are on their work?
No.
Process?
I'm much better to speak about BioCraft than I'm about anybody else.
Of course you are. Of course you are.
Mm-hmm.
So how's it going with the sort of scale up then? Clearly once it becomes commercial, you'll need to scale up. Do you have your own bioreactors, or will you be kind of outsourcing that?
Yeah, so this is something that it's definitely scale up is a big component of this industry, and we're included in that. And so, with respect to the scale up piece, actually, we will be making a. I won't say too much about it right now because we'll be making sort of a more formal announcement about that scale up piece in the next couple of months, actually. So we're in September right now, so before the end of the year, we'll be making an announcement about that.
Okay.
How we're dealing with scale up.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And you said there was a post on your LinkedIn where you said that that the supply chain for meat is increasingly precarious, both in terms of price shocks and availability, and this is why cultivated meat is going to be better. So, I mean, can you explain what you mean by that?
Sure. So, I mean, I think as BioCraft is a ultimately an ingredient company, right? And so we're looking to not produce and sell the final product to the customer, but rather, the actual pet parent, but rather the manufacturer who then makes the final product and sells it to the customer. So, our customer being the pet food manufacturers. And for those pet food manufacturers, what is their incentive to purchase, say, for example, something like cultured meat? And so we can say, well, increasingly we know that a lot of consumers are more and more interested in feeding their pets foods that are environmentally sustainable, and that is true. And pet food manufacturers are aware of that. A lot of pet food companies as well, especially the big ones, do have metrics that they want to, or at least they've said that they will be meeting in terms of what their carbon footprint, or not their without having a carbon footprint, I guess, is getting as close to that as possible. And so for them to sort of get closer to these objectives and milestones, they need to start looking at how they can replace their animal-based ingredients. And of course, with pet food manufacturer, meat being the main ingredient, this is a biggie for them. So, but one of the main pieces of interest, as you just mentioned, is that animal-based ingredients, so animal fats and animal, like the actual meat, the protein, it's an ingredient supply chain that is very, very volatile. It's volatile in the human food industry, but it's even more so in the pet food industry. So pet food manufacturers are very, very regularly subjected to volatile pricing, so major price spikes, as well as full stockouts. So, regardless of what we could, for no amount of money necessarily, dollars per pound or euros per kilo, could you buy a certain ingredient. So, for example, for a skew of your pet food. So, and this is also why we would see things like, for instance, rabbit and turkey based foods for dogs and cats. They're actually very, very popular with consumers because they tend to be more on the hypoallergenic side than chicken and beef. But they're not on the shelves very often. And they're not on the shelves very often because those animals are not consumed as much by humans. So especially for those more, as we say, they're termed sort of exotic meats, the supply chain is incredibly volatile. And so pet food manufacturers, to some extent, steer away from these more exotic protein sources, despite that they can charge more, and despite that more consumers want them, just because they could at any moment undergo a stock out, then they'd have to, that's it. They're out of stock, and this is not good for business. So to be able to vertically integrate in their supply chain a meat ingredient or an animal-based ingredient would be hugely beneficial, just in terms of adding some stability to their actual to their product line, of course, and to their financial model.
Right. Okay, that's interesting. I just want to talk a little bit about your growth media. You said it has no animal-based products in it. So are you happy with your growth media now? Is it kind of where you want it to be? Have you formed the end media, or are you still working on that?
So for the mouse, I mean, every type of cell line, so species that we'll work with, there will be adaptations or optimizations made. So the initial media that we've optimized for is for our mouse cell line. And I'd say, yes, we're very, very, very close to being final on that. So there are no animal ingredients in our media. Where we're at right now is one of the important things for at least our industry in pet food is because we're using the full everything that comes out of the bioreactor, all of the ingredients that go into feeding our cells, they also have to be ingredients that are already regulatory approved for consumption by cats or dogs. So historically, where the pharmaceutical industry, who's been growing animal cells for pharmaceutical applications or academia for research purposes for decades now, and have never had to worry about what the composition of the media is, we have to worry about it. And similarly, even for human food companies, right, when they're producing their meat, this is less of an issue because they wash the cells after. So even if they have an antioxidant in there, or some other type of growth factor that wouldn't be considered to be food approved, they wash it out. So it's not an issue. But for us, we do not benefit from those sort of that kind of ease. So for us, we've had to swap out and substitute everything for feed and food approved ingredients for cat and dog food. So right now with our media formulation, we have two medias really. We have one type of media that we use to proliferate the cells. So this is sort of the stage of the media that supports the cells to grow, our pluripotent stem cells to grow. And then we have another media that allows those cells to then differentiate, so start to turn into those cell types that actually make the nutrients that we want them to make. And for our harvesting media, that media that it comes out with the cells, it's now 100% all ingredients in there are already approved for cat and dog consumption. And with our proliferation media, I think 0.03% of the ingredients we still need to eliminate to make them feed or food approved. But that's 0.03. So we're very, very, very close.
Okay. So I'm curious to know how you became involved with pet food. Were you working in pet food before you decided to go into cultivated meats, or was it because, I mean, you said in your profile that you are obsessed with two things, animals and science, and so is it like the combination of those two things that has brought you into this world?
Yeah, so I'm a scientist by training, as you already mentioned. But starting earlier than my academic career, I grew up with 3 dogs and 3 cats. I stopped eating meat at a young age for animal welfare reasons. Started volunteering in animal rescues in my early adulthood and have been doing so ever since. And so when I was working as a postdoc at Stanford University, this was when I really decided that I would dedicate my scientific training to taking animals out of the supply chain. And at first I thought I would go into the human food category because, of course, humans are the main consumers of animal-based products. But then as I started to think about it more, 2 things became really blatantly obvious to me, which is that, of course, I haven't been supporting the animal agriculture industry for my own dietary needs for decades, and I'm doing just fine. But I am supporting it by purchasing food for my pets. And so this was something that I was thinking, okay, so, how do I solve this problem? Maybe by making an alternative. But then, speaking with some other folks, but this is really, is it really going to move the needle to actually create something that displaces the ingredients in pet food? Because, of course, pet food is made largely from the leftovers from the human food supply chain. But as I started to, again, dig deeper into that and just start to understand what the economics are in terms of the leftovers, in terms of the waste stream, the waste that animal that animal meat, the carcass waste, is roughly an over $21 billion industry globally. And so when you start to think about and you start to just sort of understand where the actual profit margins, not revenue, but profit margins in the animal agriculture industry are, they largely come down to being able to sell their products from the waste stream products. And this is pet food. So when thinking about how to really make a dent in the animal agriculture industry, and pet food being a category that nobody has ever pursued in any meaningful way before, I think largely because people do have this misconception that it's not going to move the needle, which is, I believe, to be very, very just completely inaccurate. And two, because people tend not to think about, humans are human-centric, so people tend not to think about what the contribution of any other thing on earth is aside from themselves. So so pursuing pet food seemed like this was an obvious choice once I had thought more once I actually put some thought into it.
Right. Okay. And you indicated at the beginning of the interview that you were slightly concerned about where cultivated meat was going in the media, that the media had sort of said that it wasn't going to work. Is this something that concerns you at the moment?
So I'm less, so I would say that what the media says, and it definitely concerns me because this is the information that people have access to, right? So what comes through in the media, of course, is always very important and meaningful. That said, I also understand that in terms of scientifically making a product that's going to be competitive in the pet food category, and we're thinking about cultured meat. Cultured meat is expensive. It's expensive to make. It's expensive to make in the way that the human food companies want to make it, which is creating a product that has all the three-dimensionality and scaffolding that humans are used to, because humans are used to eating meat not for nutritional purposes, but for that sort of for the cultural reasons, or for enjoyment. And so so the downstream processing that's involved in making a cultured meat product for humans enjoyment is much more difficult than it is to actually use a slurry-based ingredient for pet food. So where I'm concerned is where there could be sort of this conflation that we're making a product that's at the same price point as where the human food industry is at, because actually our process is quite different, especially the downstream process where we don't have one. So this makes it much cheaper and much more commercially viable, especially for an industry like pet food, where we would need to actually achieve prices that are cheaper. Right. Mm-hmm. Humans could go for dinner, and so cultured meat can sell in Michelin-starred restaurants, and people can spend $150 to $200 once in a blue moon. But for us, we really are interested in moving volumes, because we're a mission-based company. And so we have to be able to move volumes, which means we have to be able to sell it cheaply. And fortunately, with our process and with our product, we can do that.
So you're pretty confident that your pet food right from the get-go will be at price parity?
So price parity, to say, I mean, there's a spectrum in pet food, right? So even with the slurry-based ingredients, so there's quite a spectrum in terms of sort of the low end slurries that people buy, through to more sort of slurry that would come from animals that are free range or organic. So, and again, dependent on the actual type of meat, this also determines what the price point is. So there's quite, up to an order of magnitude difference can exist in terms of what the cost of a slurry would be. So when we say price parity, I'd say out the gate, upon launch, would we be are we going to be comparable to the lowest end slurry? No, we would be closer to a premium based slurry. But it is also the case that it's only the premium and ultra ultra premium segments of the pet food market that are growing. This is not, as long as we can, we are competitive with one of the categories, and we are, or we will be, then this is what matters.
Okay. So, I mean, I know that the times are difficult at the moment for getting funding in this space, perhaps. So have you found that difficult? Do you have the funding you need?
Yeah, funding is always a challenge. So we have some great investors on our side. So Draper Associates, SOSV, Keen Growth Capital, Orkla Food Ingredients. So we have some wonderful investors who have supported us, and we're soon to be bringing some more into the family fold as well. So it's always difficult, but yeah, this has been a more difficult time. But yeah, we have managed to secure funding thus far. So
have you looked at the option of collaboration with kind of bigger pet food companies? Is this something that's a possibility?
I mean, we're always open to and interested in speaking with anybody who might like to collaborate and partner. And so depending on what those, collaborations and partnerships look like, yeah, we're definitely always interested in talking to folks, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And when do you expect your product might be on the shelves then, if you were to make a prediction?
I think for us, I would say, as soon as 2025. So, there won't be a product, and it won't be our product, right? So it's not that consumers will go out and buy BioCraft pet nutrition for their cats or dogs. But it won't be 2024, but, as soon as 2025, we are anticipating being in a position to have, to be able to sell our ingredient to pet food manufacturers.
Okay. All right. Well, that sounds great. I'll just have one last question before we pack up. I mean, kind of going back to what you were saying about the media and their kind of depiction of the future of cultivated meat. Are you excited about the future of cultivated meat yourself?
For pet food, very much so.
Well, more broadly, perhaps. Yeah,
I'm excited about the possibility. So I also, I think in general, I would say probably everybody in the field, or most people would say it's taken longer than people have thought to get to sort of, and taken more money than people have thought to get to the point where we're at right now. I'm excited and optimistic. Do I also have some, reason to be concerned? I mean, I'd say yes, as a scientist, yes. But I'm also, excited and optimistic. I spend most of my time thinking about the problems, the scientific challenges around producing the product for our consumers, which is different from the challenges that those scientists face creating a product for the human food space. So, but there are lots of very talented scientists out there who are thinking hard about these problems. So, yeah, so I think it's a matter of time now, right? Because the industry's been around for a while and people have put a lot of money behind it. And so time is ticking. So the folks won't continue to support our endeavors forever. And right. So I think, the time it's drawing close when we really need to see price parity happen soon for the human food sphere. And again, so this has been absolutely my focus for the pet food sphere, because unless we can actually get to that price parity or close to it point, then forget it. So I feel quite yes, once now that we've actually gotten to that point with our product, I feel very, very relieved and very, very confident that we'll get there with our product. With the whole industry, I just don't have enough. I don't have enough information to be able to say.
No.
Yeah. So.
I mean, you said that there were a couple of kind of scientific hurdles to get over in the broader kind of cultivated meat space. What are those hurdles?
Well, I think, I mean, there's a few things. So certainly folks talk a lot about the media price, and that's true. And so people have made, very, very huge strides, leaps and bounds, BioCraft as well, in terms of bringing the media cost down. Cell density, so it's not just for the human food segment anyway, it's not just about what the cost is per liter of media, it's how many cells, how much meat you can grow per liter of media. And it's not just 1 liter. It could be, depending on the company, depending on the strategy, it may be many, many, many liters of media that's required per, say, for example, kilo of meat. And then there's the downstream processing. So, you can grow it up in 3D in the conventional 3-dimensional suspension bioreactor. But then from there, there's the actual processing. So taking what would be just sort of a slurry and then washing the cells and then either blending them with other plant-based ingredients or using them just 100% or close to 100% with the animal cells to actually make a product. So it's very, very nuanced. But every company is doing something quite different. And so I think it's dangerous to paint with just a wide brush, the whole industry, because folks within the industry are doing things very, very differently. It depends on the cell line. It depends on ultimately what their ultimate product is, what the downstream processing is, what the upstream processing is, many, many variations.
Yeah. I mean, it's an exciting world, and it would probably be improved by more collaboration, I suppose, because there are, lots of it is being done behind closed doors. But I guess that's the nature of competition and the industry, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of it's the nature of, I guess, of business. When it's private companies that are being funded. But yeah, certainly collaboration is it always moves the needle more quickly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Shannon. That's been very educational for me. I love listening to scientists who can just explain it all so clearly. So thank you for that. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for coming on the Future of Foods podcast.
Thanks very much for having me, Alex. Yeah, it was a pleasure.
My pleasure.